This morning, we are really privileged to have guest Dean Lee, the CEO of the Shrine of Remembrance. Last Friday, I believe approximately 50,000 people attended the ANZAC sunrise service, particularly amongst young people. Why do you think this is so?
Young people in particular started to see that veterans were not just old men and women, they were young people like them. And it's really the growth in younger generations that is driving the increased engagement in attendance at ANZAC Day and other commemorative services across the year.
What is it about with the younger generation that's creating that interest, do you think?
I think there are two factors at play. One, that the fact that it is again people like them who are being seen in uniform, which makes it relatable.
Dean, many people see the purpose of the shrine as a memorial to those who have lost their lives in battle for our country, Australia. However, it is called the Shrine of Remembrance. Can you help us understand this a bit more?
Essentially, the 89,000 Victorians who had gone to war in overseas conflicts, 19,000 of them were killed and never returned to Australian soil. Ted Bayou did some work during the centenary of ANZAC where he estimated that it was nearly 4 in every 10 households in Victoria had somebody who had been engaged in the First World War. That's almost 40% of the population.
How do you personally feel leading one of Melbourne's iconic destinations? It must be a great privilege. The Shrine of Remembrance was founded in 1934 as the National War Memorial of Victoria. Its enduring purpose is to be a memorial to honour the service and sacrifice of Victorians and Australians in war, peacemaking and peacekeeping, and as a site of national, state and cultural significance. This morning, we are really privileged to have guest Dean Lee, the CEO of the Shrine of Remembrance, to help us unpack the significance of this national symbol of remembrance and reflection. I'm Ian Bunston. Welcome to Monday Matters.
Good morning, Ian. It's a pleasure to be with you and your members.
Fantastic to have you. Dean, look, let's get into this. Last Friday, I believe approximately 50,000 people attended the ANZAC sunrise service. Over recent years, there's been a real emergence of interest in the ANZAC tradition, particularly amongst young people. Why do you think this is so?
That's true, and yes, there's estimated crowd of 50,000 at the dawn service, and of course they were joined later in the day by 10,000 veterans marching and a further 7,000 visitors who chose to come to the shrine. So you're right, the resurgence of engagement and commemoration is growing. My view in this relates to Australia's re-engagement in areas of conflict in the 1990s and early 2000s and up until 2021, where veteran service had been seen to be something of generations past because we enjoyed a very extended period of relative peace. But then, of course, we went back to war. And young people in particular started to see that veterans were not just old men and women, they were young people like them. And it's really the growth in younger generations that is driving the increased engagement in attendance at ANZAC Day and other commemorative services across the year.
So, Dean, what is it about with the younger generation that's creating that interest, do you think?
I think there are two factors at play. One, that the fact that it is again people like them who are being seen in uniform, which makes it relatable. But I think also there's been a change, some would even say a deterioration in some of the general things which hold us together as a community and as a society. Faith in religion, faith in politics have been challenged in recent decades, and people are searching for something to galvanise their identity. And there's no doubt that since the early 2000s, the story of the ANZACs, the original ANZACs, and those that have come after them has become both legend, but almost into mythology, where it is now an essential element in forming the modern Australian identity. And so a lot of people are rallying around that identity for various reasons.
Dean, many people see the purpose of the shrine as a memorial to those who have lost their lives in battle for our country, Australia. However, it is called the Shrine of Remembrance. Can you help us understand this a bit more?
Yeah, I think it is it's actually fundamental to our identity that we were The committee that guided the development of this place was called the National War Memorial Committee of Victoria. But at its dedication, the Shrine of Remembrance was chosen to be the name. And I think it's important to understand that conscious decision not to be a memorial for war, but to be a place of remembrance. And if you look back to the early 1920s and the mid 1920s when the shrine's construction was under consideration, essentially the 89,000 Victorians who had gone to war in overseas conflicts, 19,000 of them were killed and never returned to Australian soil. Ted Bayou did some work during the centenary of ANZAC where he estimated that it was nearly 4 in every 10 households in Victoria had somebody who had been engaged in the First World War. That's almost 40% of the population. So you had a grieving community with no opportunity to attend the grave of their lost loved one. And this word and notion of love is really foundational to who and what we are. We are a memorial, but as a place of remembrance, we honour service and sacrifice, not just those who died, but also those who are changed by their experience in conflict, who returned to Australia and struggled to reintegrate into society. It is instructive to me that in the stone of remembrance that sits inside the sanctuary, it is the quote from the book of John, "Greater love hath no man," that is inscribed on that stone. And it is the word love which is illuminated by the ray of light on the 11th of November each year. This place exists because of love for people who are lost or changed by war.
Dean, the mission of the Shrine of Remembrance is, and I quote this from your website, "We will memorialise those who have served in war, peacekeeping and peacemaking, engaging through education and storytelling. We will be acknowledged for our leadership and cultural significance," end of quote. But so Dean, can you tell us about the storytelling and leadership that you provide from the Shrine?
Yes, look, at its foundation and its opening in 1934, there were 300,000 people attending the opening of the shrine, which is about a third of Melbourne's population. 20 years on, when Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II dedicated the Second World War Memorial Forecourt, there were 250,000 Victorians in attendance. 20 years on from that, in the mid-1970s, there were less than 500 people here for the dawn service on Anzac Day. My leadership derives from the trustees who were charged with the stewardship of this place in the 1970s and 80s and 90s. They identified that if commemoration was to remain relevant, the shrine had to find new ways to engage with community with changing values and experience of war. They identified education and learning as being the opportunity to cause people to understand why this place is here, what its purpose is, and why it remains relevant. And the distinction that is drawn between education and learning is that education is intended to be directed at the school students, primarily of Victoria, but from all around Australia, whereas learning is broader and more general for the entire community, including those people who visit us from other nations, many of whom are unaware of Australia's engagement on the world stage for over a century.
Dean, a trip to the shrine can spark your curiosity about your personal connections to service and sacrifice. You can discover some useful links for researching family history. Just last week, I was involved with a tour of the shrine and I was able to establish a link to my uncle who was in the Second World War. How significant is this connection to past family, do you believe?
I think it's extremely important, and I think there's nothing stronger than creating a direct emotional connection via family ties to this place and to service. And as you shared with me, it was a surprise to you that you had an uncle who had served in the Second World War. The books of remembrance that sit in the ambulatory in 42 bronze caskets around the sanctuary contain the names of the 89,000 Victorians who deployed to war in the First World War. We open those books for family members, and obviously to protect the books, we ask them to check on an electronic device first that the name is present. We then open the book to that name, and I have witnessed firsthand the power of that emotional connection to the simple script which carries the name of someone that you are related to. There's nothing which causes people to more strongly reflect on what Australians have done. We've repeated that, of course, in the modern developments through the creation of electronic scrolls for the Second World War service and also for Vietnam and Korea. Those records come to us from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and as I was saying prior to some people joining us today, those records can be updated if they're found to have gaps or errors.
Dean, my final question for you this morning is this one. How do you personally feel leading one of Melbourne's iconic destinations? It must be a great privilege.
It is the greatest privilege. Look, I'm getting towards the end of my full-time working career, and there is no greater privilege than to serve as the CEO of this place. I've been coming here for nearly 10 years in this role, and each day I am moved by the gravitas of this building and also humbled by the responsibility that it projects onto me and the team of people I lead. You made reference to us being a cultural institution, and there's no doubt that we exist both as a memorial, a place of memory, but there's also a forward-looking view of remembrance, which is to consider why a nation is willing to risk its youth, to risk its potential to protect the values of democracies and the freedoms of a liberal democratic society. And I think this is where we really play an active future forward-looking role by providing opportunities for people to understand a part of what it is to be Australian. Our community now is 50% people whose parents were born in other nations. We believe we've got an active role to play, and I believe this as the leader of this institution, in allowing people to use us as a way to become Australian, to connect with the stories which have helped create this country, and to understand the values that shape the way our community seeks to function in the world.
Dean Lee, the CEO of the Shrine of Remembrance, it's been an absolute privilege to have you as a guest here today at Monday Matters to help us really further understand the significance of what the Shrine of Remembrance does and what it means to us as an Australian population. So thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Pleasure, Ian. Very much a pleasure, and I look forward to further conversations with you.